Hi, here's a quick overview video for you looking at the consolidation of Bolshevik power directly in that period after the October Revolution of 1917. This one doesn't have as many visuals as normal, it's just a bit of a quick overview for you. You can see the notes that I'm using here on consolidating Bolshevik power. So we want to understand that, okay, the Bolsheviks have seized power physically, they're in control of places like Petrograd. After some fighting, they have got control of Moscow. And also remember that really important aspect that they have also politically seized power through the Soviet system and established Sovnarkom, the new Russian government, which of course is full of just Bolsheviks. And they've done that politically through that manoeuvring to legitimately, so they say, take power of Russia. But the situation is still very precarious, and Lenin and the Bolsheviks understand that. This is a very difficult situation. Russia is in flux. There are problems. Bolsheviks are in power now, but they could be there for just days or weeks. Of course, they want to be there for a much longer period of time, but they are going to have to overcome some obstacles. So let's take a look at some of those problems that they are facing. So you can see here, one of the things is that even within the Soviet system, the Bolsheviks are not necessarily in full control. So they didn't control all of the Soviets. Yeah, they've got power in Moscow and Petrograd, but in other places they do not have a dominance. There are other socialist parties, remember, still in existence, which do dominate many of the Soviets around the country. And also, even in the Bolshevik ones themselves, even those far away from Petrograd, further away from the centre of power of Lenin in Petrograd, they may, make their own decisions. This is the beauty of the Soviet system, that it was a grassroots movement, a democratic movement for people to be involved. But now that Lenin and the Bolsheviks have got control of the government, they don't want that. They want to be in control. They want to be able to dominate. So we're going to have a look to see how they are able to achieve that. Also, of course, we know the economy was a complete disaster. World War I has trashed Russia, and certainly the provisional government had done nothing to bring it back under control. The countryside is still in anarchy, and that means that things aren't being planted or harvested properly. So the food shortage is actually going to continue for some time. Yet Lenin has promised bread. So how's he going to do it? Also, we have what we could call is a lack of government bureaucracy. And really, to be able to implement your orders as a government, you need officials spread around the place that can carry out your orders. Now, the bureaucracy of the old Tsarist regime has gone. It really melded away significantly during the time of the provisional government. Those that were left, now that the Bolsheviks are in control, refuse to acknowledge the Bolsheviks, refuse to follow their orders. And so we've got a system of government that will not operate to follow Bolshevik orders. What are they going to do? How are they going to overcome this? And that continues when we're looking at the state banks, who are really opposed to the ideals of the Bolsheviks, just refused to cooperate. They locked the money away. It took the Bolsheviks 10 days just to get the bank vaults open so they could access government funds. So these, again, are problems that the Bolsheviks are going to have to overcome if they want to stay in control. Then I want to mention two other points, which are really important. Russia's still at war. Russia is still involved in World War I. The provisional government, of course, had continued it. And I'll look at a map in a moment to show you just how close the Germans are. Yes, Lenin has promised peace, so they're going to have to do something about that pretty quickly if they want to relieve the pressure of the war and, get out of the war and the situation they're currently facing. And also this really important point. Most of the country was not controlled by the Bolsheviks. Yes, they have seized control in places like Petrograd, places like Moscow, but I want you to look at this map. This map shows us the black blobs. You can see them here. These black blobs are the areas that are controlled by the Bolsheviks. Now have a look at the black blobs in comparison to the rest of Russia. It's not a lot, is it? Okay, here's Petrograd, here's Moscow. So they've got control of places like Petrograd and Moscow and these black blobs, but that is it. The Bolsheviks face a significant task if they want to win over and then control the whole of Russia. Also on this map you can see here, this is where the Germans are. That's the front line of the war in October 1917 at the time of the revolution. That's close. We know that there was pressure to have the revolution before the Germans were able to reach Petrograd. But it goes further than that. By March 1918, that is the front line. Look at all this area that the Russians have lost to the Germans during just that last few months, including some areas that the Bolsheviks had actually controlled. This map is a really good one to keep in your mind when you're remembering the real problems that the Bolsheviks are facing as they move into, consolidating their power. They've seized power. How are they going to maintain control? One more point before we move on and understand what the Bolsheviks are actually going to do. And that is this idea that the Bolsheviks actually lacked coercive power. Now, you might say that's not a bad thing, but we'll talk about what we mean by coercive power. To combine and stay in control, to be able to stay in control, you really want to be able to, yes, get people on side with you, but also you want to be able to control those who are in opposition. The Tsarist regime of coercive power, remember the old Okhrana, okay, had been dismantled by the provisional government. The military, as we know, really is falling apart. So what have the Bolsheviks got in order to enforce their orders? Nothing. And this is a problem. Lenin is very aware of the weaknesses of the new regime. He's worried about a counter-revolution, and he knows that he needs to get very tight control in order to stay in power. The socialist revolutionaries, the Mensheviks, have still got broad support, but they're unorganised, luckily for Lenin. They're unorganised and therefore really not able to mount a counter-revolutionary movement at this stage. The conservative forces, those who might have either supported the Tsar or supported a more liberal constitutional government, also were unorganised. This is in Lenin's favour, but he needs to move quickly if he wants to actually, consolidate the power of the Bolsheviks. So in order to consolidate your power, you're usually using a combination of factors. On the one side, you want people to like you, okay? To like you. So you use things like popular reforms that give people what they want. So for example, in this case, what have they promised? They've promised peace. They've promised land, and they've promised bread. The bread's going to be difficult to be able to give right now, but if you have a look at your notes, you'll see that peace and land are two of the things that they pass on the very first day of the government. They pass what's called the peace decree, saying that they are going to go to the Germans straight away and seek a peace agreement. And that's what they do. They start negotiations to enter into a peace treaty almost straight away. The other thing they do is the land. So the land decree, the land order, is the other thing that is passed pretty much on the first day of government business. And what does it do? It abolishes private property. That gives the peasants the ability to go out, seize control of the lands, kick out the landowners. Lenin wasn't actually saying to the peasants, it's now yours, but he was saying there is no private property. Peasants, you are entitled to go out, kick out the landowners, and he's worried about fixing up the little niceties about who owns it later on. But this is enough to keep the peasants happy for the time being. However, while you've got popular reforms on one side, the other thing that they do is introduce things like improved social circumstances, improved conditions for workers, and I want you to actually research those and understand those a bit more. But on the other side over here, if people are not following your orders, so you've got opposition, what you've got to do is lock down that opposition, and you do that through coercive measures. So things like stop freedom of the press, so that the messages of your opposition are not getting out. You actually ban other political parties. And the other thing that you can do, of course, is actually crack down. You can arrest, you can exile. So you're doing things to actually effectively stop the opposition from happening. And it's this combination of these two factors that allow the Bolsheviks to not just seize the power we've seen, but now to stay in power. Getting people to like them and follow them is just as important as cracking down on the opposition, and vice versa. It's the dual approach that ends up making it successful for them. So what I want you to do now is go through your notes, read in detail about the positive reforms that they brought in order to gain support, but also the coercive measures that they implemented in order to clamp down on the opposition and ensure that just the Bolshevik message was coming through. You can see here things like closing the opposition newspapers, banning opposing political parties, including, very quickly, the Mensheviks and the Socialist Revolutionaries. Very quickly, the Bolsheviks have moved to basically ban those parties, shut down even their ideas of socialism, so that there is no alternative to what is going on, what the message the Bolsheviks are sending out. They ban strikes, no voicing of opposition on the streets, and they implement a new revolutionary justice system, which is quick, short, arbitrary, which means decisions weren't necessarily made on a logical basis, and very often violent. And in order to support that new revolutionary system, one of the key things that the Bolsheviks introduce is a new organization called the Cheka. Remember the old Ukraina? Here we have the Bolshevik Cheka. It's a brutal secret police organization led by a guy called Felix Jasinski, and it enforced cooperation by a system of fear and intimidation. We're talking about arrests, we're talking about torture, we're talking about being locked in prison, we are talking about executions, deaths. In its first year of operation, the Cheka deals with over 50,000 people in various ways. We will come back and look at the Cheka in a lot more detail later on. But what I also want you to do, as well as looking at the actual coercive measures, is think about those things that they introduce to improve. So things like, for example, things in favour of the workers, things that are consistent with the Bolshevik ideology of establishing a dictatorship of the proletariat for the workers. Okay. Also, measures against the church, which is another form of opposition to the Bolshevik voice, but also greater equality between men and women. Those of us studying Kollontai will come back and look at that in a lot more detail. So you need to explore some of these ideas in your research so that you've got a range of different aspects that were introduced by the Bolsheviks, which were intended to transform Russia into a new socialist state. Okay. A dictatorship of the proletariat for the proletariat. So what we're looking at here are all the things that the Bolsheviks are doing in order to stay in power now that they're there. Thanks for listening.